No one in Maribel Springs ever noticed the quiet waitress behind the counter until the morning she raised her hands, spoke in silence, and made the whole town remember what grace looked like.
Hello, if you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and tap the notification bell. Type in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as touching as this one, or maybe even crazier. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's begin.
Morning light crept through the fog that hugged Maribel Springs, painting gold streaks across the chipped windows of June's diner. The smell of bacon and brewed coffee filled the air, the low hum of chatter rising like music beneath the squeak of old ceiling fans. Behind the counter, Samantha Hutchinson moved quietly, her hands swift, graceful, practiced. She'd been working there for 4 years, long enough for the locals to know her as the polite girl who never caused trouble. She smiled when spoken to, nodded when thanked, and always seemed half a breath away from disappearing into the wallpaper. But beneath that soft exterior, Samantha carried the weight of a story no one had ever asked about. Her eyes held it, calm, steady, a river that had seen both flood and drought. She wasn't mute, just careful. The bell above the door jingled, and the morning stillness shifted. A frail woman stepped in, her hair silver and perfectly coiled, her movements deliberate but sure. Some people waved politely, others simply smiled and whispered. Samantha froze, tray in hand. She recognized her instantly. Martha Gareth, the police chief's deaf mother. Martha had lived in Maribel Springs her entire life, quiet but fiercely respected. Her son, Chief Nate Gareth, kept a close eye on her, especially since his wife's passing. Most people adored Martha, but few ever tried to communicate beyond simple gestures or written notes. Samantha took a deep breath and walked over, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Martha looked up, startled but warm. Samantha's lips curved in a small smile as her hands began to move, slow, deliberate, graceful. "Good morning, ma'am," she signed. "Would you like your usual? Coffee, with cream, 1 sugar?" The diner fell silent. Forks paused mid-air. Even the radio seemed to quiet. Martha blinked, then her face broke into a radiant smile. Her hands fluttered back in reply, her signing confident, but trembling with emotion. "You sign beautifully," she responded. "Who taught you?" Samantha's throat tightened, but she smiled softly. "My mother," she signed back. "She was deaf too." A tear glimmered in Martha's eyes as she reached out, lightly touching Samantha's hand, a gesture of kinship and understanding that words could never capture. In that small diner, something shifted. The other customers watched, hushed, uncertain whether they were witnessing a miracle or a memory come alive. Behind the counter, June Ellison, the diner's owner, blinked back tears. She'd known Samantha for years, knew she carried grief like an invisible bruise, but had never seen this side of her. The bell above the door jingled again. The hush deepened. Chief Nate Gareth stepped in, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. He froze when he saw his mother and the waitress signing fluently. His eyes darted between them, confusion giving way to something harder to name. Disbelief? Maybe even suspicion. Martha, oblivious to the tension, turned toward him with pride. Her hands moved quickly. "She speaks my language, Nathan. Isn't that wonderful?" Nate managed a stiff smile, nodding once. But as his gaze lingered on Samantha, something unspoken passed between them. A question neither was ready to ask. Samantha lowered her eyes and returned to work, her fingers trembling as she poured fresh coffee. The sound of the pot clinking against ceramic echoed louder than any voice. Outside, the sun broke through the mist, bathing the town in pale warmth. Yet inside that diner, the air stayed heavy, filled with a quiet kind of electricity, the kind that hums right before a storm. Samantha didn't know it yet, but that one simple gesture, a greeting in sign language, had set something in motion. It would awaken old memories, uncover buried truths, and test the very idea of forgiveness in a town still learning how to listen. Have you ever met someone who spoke to your soul without saying a word?
In small towns like Maribel Springs, stories travel faster than sound. By noon that same day, everyone had heard about the waitress who signed to the police chief's deaf mother. At the diner, whispers started to replace the clinking of spoons. The mailman mentioned it to the grocery clerk. The grocery clerk mentioned it to her husband at the station. By the time Chief Nate Gareth returned from his patrol, 3 different versions of the story had already reached him. Each one made him pause a little longer before walking inside. He found his mother at the kitchen table, her old hands gliding through the air as she signed with excitement. She told him how Samantha's hands were like music, how her gestures carried warmth, not pity. Nate smiled faintly, but something in his gut tightened. He'd spent years protecting his mother from pity and from pain. That night he pulled the blinds, poured himself a drink, and stared at the single-framed photo on the wall. His younger brother, Aaron, smiling in a police cadet uniform. Aaron had died 7 years ago in a hit-and-run that was never solved. Nate whispered into the quiet, "You'd love her, Ma. You'd think she was hope itself." Then his jaw set. But people aren't always who they seem. The next morning the diner buzzed louder than usual. A reporter from the Maribel Gazette had stopped by, notebook in hand, asking questions about the signing waitress. Samantha brushed it off politely, but she could feel the shift. People watched her differently now, with curiosity, admiration, maybe even envy. Behind the counter, June Ellison noticed. "You're trending, girl," she said with a grin. "All it took was a good deed and 10 nosy souls." Samantha laughed softly, but didn't meet her eyes. She knew attention could be dangerous. When Martha Gareth walked in again, the diners seemed to lean in collectively. Samantha greeted her as before, but this time Martha asked for something more personal. "Your hands," she signed, "they remind me of someone I used to know, a woman from the old community center." Samantha's smile faltered. She replied in sign, "My mother used to teach there, years ago." Martha's eyes widened. "Marjorie Hutchinson?" Samantha nodded. A silence hung between them, a silence thick enough to feel. From the corner booth, Nate watched, unseen. He couldn't hear their conversation, but the look on his mother's face stirred something old in him. Recognition, maybe fear. He pulled out his phone and texted Deputy Tolina Alvarez. "Find everything you can on Marjorie Hutchinson. Used to teach at the community center. Died about a decade ago." Tina's reply came fast. "Copy that, Chief. Any reason why?" Nate didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on Samantha, who now stood behind the counter, lost in thought. Later, when the diner closed and the lights dimmed, Samantha lingered at one of the booths, tracing invisible words into the tabletop. She remembered her mother's final days, the hospital beeps, the smell of antiseptic, and the promise she never got to keep. She whispered, barely audible, "I'll find him, Mama. I'll tell him I'm sorry." Outside, rain began to fall. Nate sat in his cruiser across the street, the wipers brushing away drops of guilt and uncertainty. He didn't know what Samantha meant to his mother yet, but he knew one thing for sure. No one shows up fluent in silence without carrying a story. Do you believe some people are sent to cross your path for a reason? By Thursday, the story of the signing waitress had turned into something else entirely. Admiration had curdled into curiosity, And curiosity was beginning to taste a lot like suspicion. The regulars at June's Diner still smiled at Samantha Hutchinson, but their smiles lingered a second too long, as though each one was quietly wondering what else she hadn't told them. And in a town like Maribel Springs, silence was never empty. It was crowded with opinion. Chief Nate Gareth felt it too. Everywhere he went, someone brought up the girl from the diner. He told himself he was just protecting his mother, but deep down, a different reason gnawed at him. He couldn't stop thinking about the way that shy waitress had made his mother light up. Hope was a dangerous thing when you'd spent years living on duty and ghosts. That afternoon, he walked into June's Diner under the pretext of checking on parking violations. The bell jingled, and Samantha's hand stilled mid-pour. "Chief Gareth," June greeted, drying her hands on a towel. "Coffee?" He nodded, eyes flicking towards Samantha. "Black, and, thanks." Samantha didn't look up until she had to set the cup in front of him. Their eyes met for half a heartbeat. "Your mother's well, I hope?" she asked, voice soft but steady. "He is." He studied her face. "She said you knew her, years back?" Samantha hesitated. "Not her, my mother did." He leaned back, the leather of his jacket creaking. Marjorie Hutchinson. The name hit like a pulse through the diner. Samantha's knuckles whitened around the coffee pot. "You knew her?" "I remember her from the center. My brother volunteered there." Nate's tone gentled for a moment, then hardened again. "You were just a kid then." "I was 12, she said quietly, "old enough to remember that people only looked at us when something bad happened." He wanted to answer, but the radio on his shoulder crackled. "Unit 2, we've got an update on the 2016 hit-and-run case. Vehicle ID confirmed. Old Town Road." His stomach dropped. That was the case. Aaron's case. Nate stood, muttering a quick thanks, and left, leaving a swirl of unease behind him. Samantha watched him go, heart pounding. The mention of a hit-and-run stirred something old and painful, a night of sirens and headlights, and her brother Caleb's terrified face. Later, in her tiny apartment above the laundromat, Samantha sat on her bed, the old box of photos spread out before her. Her mother's smile beamed from every picture, except the last one, where she looked tired but proud, standing beside two young men at the community center. One of them was Aaron Gareth. Samantha traced his outline with her fingertip. Then she found a torn newspaper clipping tucked in the box. "Local youth volunteer dies in tragic hit and run." A whisper escaped her. "No, it can't be." Meanwhile, Nate stared at the reopened file on his desk. The partial witness statement, blurred handwriting, one name barely legible, Caleb Hutchinson. He pushed the file away, anger tightening his chest. Could it be the same family? Could that quiet waitress have known all along? He didn't want to believe it, but grief has a way of bending truth until it fits the shape of pain. Outside, rain hammered the windows. In two different rooms, two wounded hearts reached the same conclusion for opposite reasons. Maybe it's better if we stay away. Have you ever held back from someone, not because you didn't care, but because caring felt like a risk you couldn't afford?
The storm that rolled into Maribel Springs on Friday wasn't the polite, passing kind. It came roaring off the hills with sheets of rain that drowned the streets and turned the diner's neon sign into a trembling blur of red. By evening, the town's emergency lines were flooded. A transformer near Old Town Road had sparked out, and half the block, including June's Diner, went dark. Nate Gareth was still at the precinct when he got the call from his mother. Her voice trembled through the text-to-speech app she used. "Power's out. I can't get the door open. It's jammed." He was out the door before the sentence finished scrolling. When he reached the narrow lane, rain soaked him to the bone in seconds. He fought the swollen front door, shoved it open, and guided his mother to the cruiser. "Shelter set up at June's. Let's go," he said. Inside the diner, candles flickered on tables, their flames swaying to the rhythm of thunder. June was herding people to a back corner where it was driest. Samantha was there, sleeves rolled up, helping an elderly man steady his oxygen tank. When Nate and his mother stepped in, heads turned. "Chief Gareth!"
June called. "We've got spare blankets in the pantry. Could use some muscle." He nodded, shaking off his coat, and froze when he saw Samantha kneeling beside a crying child, calming her with a soft hum that somehow carried through the chaos. Martha smiled through the shadows. She touched Nate's arm and signed. "See? She always finds the frightened ones." An hour later, thunder still snarled over the rooftops. The diner had become a cocoon of warmth and flickering light. Samantha stood by the counter, handing out cups of cocoa when Nate approached. "You shouldn't still be here," he said quietly. "You've done enough." She met his eyes, steady. "So have you, yet here we are." He exhaled, half a laugh, half surrender. "Guess neither of us knows when to stop saving people." Something softened in her then, like a window cracking open after years sealed shut. Sometimes saving them is easier than saving yourself. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them heavy with things unsaid. Martha called softly for Samantha. Her hands moved gracefully. "Sit with me, dear. Tell me about your mother again." Samantha sat beside her, candlelight painting her features gold. She used to sign stories at bedtime. She said sign language was proof that silence could sing. Martha's eyes glistened. She reached for Samantha's hand, and that's when Nate noticed the small silver ring on Samantha's finger. It was old, worn smooth with time, but the engraving caught his eye. A tiny swirl pattern identical to the one on his late brother's watch. His breath hitched. He didn't say anything, but his expression changed. A flicker of disbelief, then suspicion. Samantha saw it. Her smile faltered, and she withdrew her hand gently. "Chief," June called from across the room, breaking the moment, "we could use help setting up more chairs." Nate nodded, backing away, his thoughts a tangle of lightning and memory. As the storm outside began to quiet, another one took shape inside him. If that ring meant what he thought it did, then this woman, this quiet, kind waitress, wasn't just tied to his mother's past. She was tied to his brother's death.
By morning, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like metal and thunder. The townspeople drifted out of June's diner in pairs and clusters, thanking Samantha for her kindness as they went. Martha Gareth was the last to leave, helped into the cruiser by her son. She waved to Samantha through the window, her eyes glowing with the kind of affection that only comes from recognition. But Nate didn't look back. He couldn't. That night, after his mother had gone to bed, Nate sat alone in the dim light of his home office, the silver watch beside him. The matching swirl on Samantha's ring replayed in his mind like a siren. He turned to his computer and searched through old police archives. 2016. The hit and run on Willow Creek Road. Victim, Aaron Gareth. Witness, Caleb Hutchinson. No charges, case closed due to lack of evidence. His hand trembled on the mouse. Caleb Hutchinson. The name linked to her, to the woman his mother adored. Meanwhile, upstairs in her small apartment, Samantha Hutchinson pulled the ring from her finger and set it on the windowsill. The dawnlight made it shimmer like an accusation. She whispered into the morning, "I didn't know he was your brother. I didn't know until it was too late." Her reflection in the glass looked nothing like the shy waitress everyone thought she was. It looked like a survivor haunted by mercy withheld. She opened the old wooden box again, the same one from her mother's things. Beneath the newspaper clipping was a folded letter, worn at the edges, the ink faded but still legible. It was from Aaron Gareth. "Marjorie, thank you for helping us with the youth program. Caleb's got real promise. Tell your daughter she's brave for learning the songs and sign. My brother Nate might visit next month. You'd like him. He believes in fixing what's broken." Her tears hit the paper before she could stop them. Fixing what's broken. If only he knew. Flashback. 7 years earlier. The night was sharp with cold. 12-year-old Samantha sat in the back of her mother's old sedan, her brother Caleb in the driver's seat.
He'd borrowed the car against her mother's wishes. Just a short drive, he had said. The road shimmered with frost. Laughter filled the car, the radio low. Then headlights, screech, metal against metal. The world went white, then red, then silent. When Samantha came to, Caleb was outside the car, shaking, breath ragged. A man lay on the road motionless. A flashlight flickered near his hand. Aaron Gareth's badge. "Sam?" Caleb choked. "We can't stay. He came out of nowhere." She remembered the panic, the fear of losing her brother, the way her mother's voice echoed in her head. Protect your family, no matter what. So she did. They drove away, and she never told anyone. Until now, the memory lived like a ghost behind her ribs. Present day. Samantha folded the letter, hands shaking, and placed it beside the ring. Outside, tires crunched against the wet gravel. A knock echoed through the apartment door. 3 sharp raps. Police raps. She opened it to find Nate standing there, raincoat dripping, jaw tight. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Samantha's fingers clenched the edge of the door. "About what?" He said. "About my brother, and about why you're wearing his ring." The air thickened. Neither spoke for several seconds. The only sound was the whisper of rain against the roof. Finally, Samantha stepped aside. "Come in." He entered slowly, eyes scanning the room, the photos, the faded letter on the table, the open box. "You found it," she said softly. "I was hoping you would." Nate looked up, confusion and anger colliding. "You knew? You knew who I was?" "I knew your mother. I knew your brother, but I didn't know that night until it was too late." Her voice broke. Nate's stare hardened. "You were there?" Samantha nodded, tears streaking her face. "I didn't drive. My brother did. We were kids. I tried to stop him, but he panicked. He didn't mean to hit him. He just—" Nate turned away, fists clenched. 7 years I looked for answers. 7 years you served me coffee." "I didn't know how to tell you," she whispered. "I was afraid you'd never forgive me." Silence. Heavy. Endless. Then Martha's words echoed in his mind. "She always finds the frightened ones." He looked back at her, at the trembling hands that had once spoken his mother's language better than anyone. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about erasing pain. Maybe it was about deciding that pain didn't get to end the story. But right now, he wasn't ready to say that out loud. "I need time," he said, finally. Voice low. "And so do you." He left without another word. Samantha sank to the floor, clutching the letter and the ring. The storm was gone, but somehow it still felt like it was raining inside her. If the truth could free you, but also destroy everything you love, would you still tell it?
A week passed. Maribel Springs settled back into its sleepy rhythm, pretending storms never came. But for Samantha Hutchinson and Nate Gareth, every sunrise carried the aftertaste of confession. She still worked her morning shifts at June's Diner, but now she moved through the place like a ghost with purpose. Kind, polite, but somewhere far away behind her eyes. People noticed the police chief's absence, too. He hadn't stopped in since that night. Then, on the 8th morning, the bell jingled. Samantha looked up, and there he was, Nate Gareth. No uniform today, just a weathered flannel shirt, sleeves rolled. His mother followed close behind, cane tapping rhythmically. Every pair of eyes in the diner shifted to them. The silence that filled the space was thick with knowing. Martha signed cheerfully. "We missed you." Samantha's hands hesitated before she replied, "I've missed you, too."
Martha smiled, unaware of the earthquake humming beneath their quiet exchange. Nate sat down at the counter. His voice was low, measured. 2 coffees, please. She poured without a word, the scent of roasted beans filling the silence. When she set the cup before him, her hand trembled slightly, but not from fear this time. "Thank you," he said. "Always," she replied. It was the first peace they'd shared in days, and neither knew how to hold it. After the morning rush, the diner emptied, leaving only rain on the windows and the low hum of the fridge. Martha had dozed off in the corner booth, with a half-eaten slice of pie before her. Samantha wiped down the counter slowly. Nate stood, walked to the jukebox near the window, and slipped in a coin. The soft crackle of an old country tune filled the space. She smiled faintly. "Your mother's favorite," he said, leaning against the counter. "She used to make us dance to it after dinner. Aaron always complained, said it made him feel like he was in an old western." Samantha laughed, a small, unexpected sound that lit the room like sunlight on glass. For a moment, the grief between them wasn't a wall, it was a bridge. "Why didn't you leave town?" he asked quietly after a while. Samantha turned, eyes soft. "Because running doesn't undo anything. It just makes you forget what still needs forgiving." He nodded, staring into his cup. "You sound like my brother." "I wish I'd known him longer," she said. "He was a good man." "I know," she whispered. "He wrote to my mother before he died." That got Nate's attention. "He did?" She nodded, retrieving the folded letter from her apron pocket. Creased, smoothed, read too many times to count. Nate unfolded it carefully, reading the faded ink. When he reached the line, "He believes in fixing what's broken," his throat closed. He looked up, eyes glistening. "You kept this all these years?" she said. "It reminded me there was still something worth becoming." He folded it again, slower this time, as though returning a sacred thing. "Maybe you're right. Maybe forgiveness isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning we almost missed." Martha stirred then, blinking awake. Her hands moved, signing to both of them. "He would want you to stop carrying this." They both froze, watching her. She smiled, her hands still. "Pain keeps us alive, but love is what lets us live." Tears welled in Samantha's eyes. Nate reached for a napkin, but ended up handing her his hand instead. Neither spoke. The silence said everything. Outside, sunlight cut through the last of the gray clouds, pouring through the window onto the counter, right where their hands touched. For the first time since the accident, it didn't hurt to breathe. Have you ever forgiven someone so deeply that you weren't sure who was being saved, you or them? As the sun climbed higher, the jukebox fell quiet, leaving only the soft ticking of the diner clock. 2 souls sat in its glow, one learning to forgive, the other learning to deserve it. The healing had begun, but peace in Maribel Springs never came without one last test.
The following Monday began like any other in Maribel Springs. Too much sun, too much gossip, too much pretending that life was fine. June's diner smelled of cinnamon and syrup. The bell chimed with every new customer, but beneath the morning bustle, something uneasy lingered. Samantha felt it before she saw it. Nate Gareth was standing outside, talking to a man in plain clothes, a state investigator. Their voices were low, serious. Nate's face was unreadable. When he finally stepped inside, silence rippled across the room like a breeze through tall grass. He walked straight to the counter. "Can we talk?" Samantha's stomach twisted. She nodded and led him toward the back hallway near the pantry, away from the staring eyes.
He closed the door behind them. "They reopened the case," he said, flatly. "The hit and run." Her pulse stopped for a second. "What?" "New witness came forward. Someone claims they saw your brother that night. His car, your mother's license plate." She backed away, shaking her head. "No, they can't. There's no proof, Nate. It was years ago." His jaw tightened. "There's proof now, and they're saying you were in the car, too." Her voice broke. "I was a child." "I know," he said quietly, "but the law doesn't care how old guilt gets." She looked up, searching his face for mercy, but found only duty. "So that's why you came," she whispered. "Not because you cared, because you're a cop." "That's not fair," he snapped, but even as he said it, he knew she was right. Back in the diner, Martha was at her usual booth, smiling softly at a child who was drawing with crayons. When she looked up and saw them, Samantha pale, Nate stone-faced, something inside her froze. She could read their faces better than their words. Later, when Nate sat beside her, she reached for his hand. Her fingers moved, firm, deliberate. "You hurt her." He looked down. "I'm trying to protect her." "From what?" she signed sharply. "The truth or yourself?" He didn't answer. That night, the knock on Samantha's door came again. But this time, it wasn't Nate. It was two officers with clipboards and careful eyes. They asked her to come down to the station for questioning. As she stood under the flickering hallway light, neighbors peeked from cracked doors, whispering. She could feel their words even if she couldn't hear them. That waitress, the one from the diner? At the precinct, she sat across from Nate in the interview room. The hum of the fluorescent light above them was the only sound. "I didn't reopen it," he said quietly. "It wasn't my call." She stared at him, hollow. "But you didn't stop it either." He swallowed hard. "You have to understand, Sam. If I interfere, you already did. When you let me believe we could be something more than what I did." He closed his eyes, pain twisting through his face. She stood. "I'm done apologizing for surviving." When she left the room, the door slammed like a verdict. Hours later, rain began again, the kind that didn't cleanse but punished. Martha showed up at Samantha's apartment, drenched and trembling, signing rapidly. "He's scared, you both are. Don't let fear finish what fate started." Samantha broke down, sinking to her knees, holding the older woman's hands like an anchor. "He doesn't trust me," she whispered. Martha smiled through her tears, touching Samantha's cheek. "Then trust him first." But Samantha couldn't. Not yet. Meanwhile, Nate sat alone in his cruiser, the file open on the passenger seat. A grainy photo stared back at him. A crushed bumper, a half-buried tire track. And then a note in his brother's handwriting he'd never noticed before. "If anything ever happens to me, tell people to forgive first, blame later." The words blurred through his tears. He realized then that he'd done the opposite. He'd blamed first, always. But redemption never came without a breaking. And in that moment, he knew. If he didn't fix this, he'd lose not just the truth, but the one person who had ever spoken to his soul without saying a word. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that fear made you treat them like a stranger? The next morning, the sun rose gray and cold. The diner was quiet. Samantha wasn't there. June noticed first, frowning as she looked out the window toward the empty street. Maribel Springs had felt her absence before, but this time
It wasn't silence she left behind. It was heartbreak.
Maribel Springs woke beneath a veil of fog, the kind that made everything look half-remembered. The street outside June's diner was slick with last night's rain. A closed sign hung crooked in the window. Samantha wasn't there. June stood behind the counter, phone in hand, sighing. She didn't call in, didn't text either. Martha Gareth sat quietly in her usual booth, eyes thoughtful. She lifted her hands and signed to June. Let her breathe. She needs space to decide if she still belongs here. June frowned, whispering, "And what about him?" Martha smiled sadly. He'll find her. Pain always leads home when love's real. At the precinct, Nate Gareth hadn't slept. The coffee on his desk had gone cold hours ago, but he kept staring at it like it held answers. The reopened file still lay open beside him. The witness statement had fallen apart under scrutiny. Too vague, too late. The case was officially closed again. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt hollow. He took off his badge and set it down, the metal clinking softly on the desk. When the rain finally stopped, he drove, not to the station, not to the diner, but out of town, toward the hills where the old Willow Creek Road wound like a scar through the trees. He parked on the shoulder, engine idling, staring at the bend where his brother had died. The guardrail still bore faint scratches, like memories carved in steel. Nate stepped out, wind tugging at his jacket. He closed his eyes, letting the silence speak. For 7 years he had chased justice, thinking it would heal him. But justice without understanding had only made him lonelier. He knelt beside the roadside marker, a small wooden cross with faded writing. Someone had left wildflowers there. Samantha. He knew it instantly. He touched one of the petals. "You came here first," he murmured. "Of course you did." He looked up at the sky. "Aaron, if you can hear me, tell me what to do." The wind moved through the trees, a low whisper that sounded almost like, "Forgive first, blame later." In her apartment, Samantha packed slowly. She folded her uniforms, her aprons, the few books she owned. Everything felt too heavy, too full of what she was trying to leave behind. Her brother Caleb had written from a rehab center 2 days earlier, finally sober, finally apologizing. His letter ended simply, "You taught me silence doesn't mean you stop living. It means you start listening." She smiled faintly through tears. Then a knock came at the door, one she didn't expect, but somehow had been waiting for. When she opened it, Nate stood there, no badge, no uniform, just rain and exhaustion in his eyes. "I thought you'd left," he said quietly. "I almost did, but your mother asked me to stay. She said you'd come when you were ready." He laughed softly. "She's usually right." They stood in silence, neither sure what to say next. The distance between them felt both fragile and sacred. "I went back to the road," he said finally, "to where Aaron died. I saw the flowers." Samantha swallowed. "They deserved them. So do you," he said. She shook her head. "No, I was there. I didn't stop him." "You were a child," he said. "You were scared. I know that now." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm still scared." "So am I." He stepped closer. "You once said sign language proves silence can sing. Maybe forgiveness is the same. Maybe it doesn't have to sound perfect to mean something." Her lip trembled. "Do you forgive me?" Nate hesitated. His voice broke when he spoke. "I don't know how to yet, but I want to learn, if you'll let me." Samantha nodded, tears falling freely. "Then I'll stay, and I'll listen." He reached for her hand, not as a cop, not as a man trying to fix the past, but as someone finally choosing to live in the present. Their hands met, fingers trembling but sure. Outside, the clouds began to part, and the light spilled across her window. Martha was right. Pain had led them home. Have you ever stood at the crossroads between running away and staying to heal, and finally chosen to stay? That night, the diner lights glowed warm again. June flipped the open sign back over, smiling as she watched through the window. Samantha and Nate sitting side by side, not saying much, but saying everything. The past hadn't vanished, but it had stopped ruling them.
The next morning, sunlight filtered through the clouds, laying soft gold across Maribel Springs. After weeks of gray, the whole town felt reborn, quieter somehow, as if the air itself had exhaled. At June's diner, the tables filled slowly. Construction workers, teachers, mothers with toddlers. The bell above the door rang steady, like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. Behind the counter, Samantha Hutchinson poured coffee, her movements unhurried, gentle. For the first time in years, her hands didn't shake. Martha Gareth sat in her booth, watching her with a proud, knowing smile. The small TV over the counter buzzed with morning news. A local reporter spoke about the police department dropping an old case due to insufficient evidence, but no one seemed to care about that anymore. The town had new things to talk about. Quiet, human things. June leaned towards Samantha. "You're glowing," she teased softly. "Love'll do that to a woman." Samantha blushed. "Maybe peace will too." When the door opened again, Nate Gareth stepped in. Not in uniform, not as the police chief, but as a man finally free of the armor he'd worn for too long. His eyes met hers immediately, and for a moment, the diner disappeared. He walked up to the counter, stopping just short of her. No words, just a small, shy smile. Martha caught Samantha's eye from the booth and began to sign, slowly, her gestures delicate as sunlight through lace. He came back. "You speak his language now. Show him what love sounds like when it doesn't need words." Samantha's throat tightened. She set down the coffee pot and wiped her palms on her apron, trembling not from fear, but from the enormity of what she felt. She lifted her hands. The room quieted, like the world was leaning in. Her fingers moved, smooth, certain, graceful. "You don't owe me forgiveness," she signed softly, eyes glistening, "but I owe you truth." Nate's eyes filled. He lifted his own hands, slow, hesitant, unsure, but he tried. The first motion came awkwardly, then steadier. "You gave me truth already. You gave me peace." The diner stayed silent, no one daring to break the spell. Samantha smiled through tears. Her next sign was simple, luminous. "Then let's begin again." June turned away, pretending to refill a coffee cup she'd already filled. Martha's hands fluttered like applause, proud and quiet. And through the wide glass window, the sunlight hit just right, falling over them both like a blessing. Outside, a new mural was being painted on the wall across the street, something the high school art club had started that morning. It showed two hands mid-motion, fingers caught in the shape of a sign that meant hope. Beneath it, painted in pale blue letters, the words, "Silence speaks love if someone dares to listen." That night, Samantha walked down Willow Creek Road again, this time not to mourn, but to remember. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Nate was there waiting, leaning against his truck. They didn't speak, but when their eyes met, everything they'd survived seemed to dissolve into something sacred. He handed her a small folded note. Inside, in his brother's handwriting, were the words he'd read at the crash site. "Forgive first, blame later." She looked up. "You kept it?" He nodded. "It's what brought me back." They stood there in silence, hands brushing, hearts steady. For once, silence wasn't absence, it was presence. The sound of two lives finally finding the same rhythm. As the sun set behind the hills, the light turned the sky into fire and gold. Martha's laughter echoed faintly in Samantha's mind, gentle, proud, whole. And for the first time, Samantha believed her story wasn't one of loss, but of becoming. When was the last time you listened, not to words, but to someone's silence, and realized it was their way of saying, "I'm still here"? If this story touched you, tell me below, do you believe forgiveness can rewrite a life or only heal it? Months later, the diner walls held framed photos of the mural outside. Samantha and Martha started weekly sign language sessions, open to everyone. Nate attended each one, sometimes fumbling his way through a sentence, but never stopping. The first sign they taught every class was hope. The second was home. Because, for all their pain and silence, that's what they had built together. A home where every sound, spoken or signed, meant love.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you loved this story, you will definitely love the next one. It's more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So go ahead and watch it now. Click on the image on your screen right away to watch the next one. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It helps and encourages us to share the best human interest stories you'd love.